I loved him, but I was scared of being controlled by him all the time while we were shooting Smokey and the Bandit. When Sally Field said that, the room went silent. A simple line that was strong enough to break the image of Burt Reynolds and Sally Field, who were the most loved couple in Hollywood in the 1970s. But that was only the first crack in the wall that Hollywood was known for. Because the truth is that the actors' lives were in danger while filming the famous rush scenes. A private scene between Sally and Burt was taken out of the story for good. Also, not many people know that the movie started with an illegal run of Coors beer. If you ever thought that Smokey and the Bandit was just a silly chase comedy, wait until you hear what the actors have finally said. Here is the secret side of a famous building in Hollywood. People haven't been able to see this side for almost 50 years. 1. I would have died if I was off by just 1 inch. Burt Reynolds' statement will chill your spine. Do you remember? The noise of the engine could be heard over the dusty red turns. The black Pontiac Trans Am streaked across the screen like lightning, and its tires spun into white smoke clouds. In the driver's seat, Burt Reynolds, whose smile made the whole country sigh, only had to tilt the wheel for the whole theater to explode. But behind that easy swagger was a truth that no one had ever heard, something that everyone had been hiding for decades. Burt Reynolds did almost all of the chase shots by himself. And not the fake Hollywood speed you see these days, the real thing. 100 to 120 cars can fit on narrow roads that aren't completely stopped. No current safety gear, no CGI to fix mistakes, no special safety gear, no wires, no air cushions, and no simulation car. See how Burt was shaking, skidding, and steering in a split second? That was his real life being pushed to the edge. He meant it half-jokingly, but everyone who heard him got cold. You wouldn't be hearing this story today if a dog had run across the road. Oh, and that wasn't a lie. At that time, Burt Reynolds was the biggest star in Hollywood. He could have died in that scene if the tires had slid an extra inch, the Trans Am's tail had swung half a degree wider, or the ground had been wet by a single streak of water. There isn't a secret safety harness, any CGI, or a real rescue team waiting off-screen. Just Burt, a car with 700 horsepower, and bends on the road, where being off by 1 centimeter meant no one could help him. What scared the team even more was that it wasn't the first time he was so close to dying. The scene where the Trans Am cuts through a baseball field looks fun and safe on screen, but the car actually lost control and crashed right into the dugout to the right. The impact wasn't planned or practiced, and when the dust rose, everyone on the team thought they had just seen a disaster. What if Burt had turned the wheel 2 seconds later? Or what if the dugout wasn't made of hollow wood? The car would have hit the house and Burt Reynolds would never have been able to get out. The team knew it. Way too well. They were so good at it that they didn't tell anyone about the accident, wouldn't let insurance handle it, and hid it. They were afraid that one newspaper story would ruin the whole project and make Burt not be able to drive again. Burt was different, though. He picked speed. He picked danger. He picked the thrill that made people hold their breath as the Trans Am slid around each turn. Smokey and the Bandit also became famous because he walked that very thin line between life and death. This is the first time Sally Field has talked about the truth behind the fuse, the perfect love story from the 1970s. That moment when Sally Field is in the passenger seat and the wind blows her hair around. Burt Reynolds looking over with that look that is half naughty and half loving. For a second, it stopped everything. You might have thought they were really in love if you saw the movie or reruns of it on TV in the 1980s and 1990s. But Sally Field, the pretty woman who made Bandit and America fall in love with her, told them something they didn't expect. I loved him. But the feeling that you are always being watched. It wore me out. Burt Reynolds and Sally Field fell in love from the first days they worked together, when Bandit and Carrie only looked at each other through the window. The group couldn't keep up with how fast it was going. The two of them were always together, but people never saw how much Burt Reynolds loved her. If Sally stood on the left side of the frame on set, Burt moved to the left right away. Went to the director and asked for a different view. Burt recommended moving everything around so he could stand closer to her. It would have been enough to have one line of dialogue in some scenes, but Burt demanded that we add a hug. It'll feel more like it should. Several crew members said that the story had to be changed several times just to make room for Burt's feelings. When Sally Field was new to acting, she was cast as a flying nun, and Burt Reynolds was on magazine covers as the most wanted man in America. Admired as the perfect example of manhood. The press was shocked when a famous person was seen kissing a small, poor, unglamorous girl. A fairy tale love story on stage, but the truth was much less pretty. In parts of her book, Sally Field is very honest. Bert always tried to be close to me. He wanted to hug me, touch me, and stay close. At first, I thought it was love. Then I understood that I had to stay in his circle at all times. What really hurt Sally wasn't that Bert had emotional control over her. It was always how he wanted to fix her, the way she smiled, the way she rested, and the way she looked in public. Bert once told her, "Your hair would look better if it were longer." I like it that way. To get away from the sweet, girly image that the world had stuck her in during the 1960s, Sally had to fight. She wanted to become an adult and be seen as a real actor. But next to Bert, she shrunk into the small figure he liked. Bert loved the idea of her as the smart, cute, short girl who could make him laugh, Sally wrote. But he avoided all real conversations about things that were more important. In the book, she says that Bert was afraid of getting close. He was hurt and couldn't talk about it. Burt Reynolds was the perfect man for a whole country, strong, sure of himself, and never weak. But Sally never had anyone she could lean on because of that. They had to break up after 5 years of being together. It wasn't that they stopped loving each other, it was just that they were tired of loving each other the only way they knew how. But the split wasn't the worst part. It was the quiet afterward. There was silence for almost 30 years. Burt Reynolds said, "The woman I loved most in my life was Sally Field," years after the split. "I messed up everything." He claimed that he wasn't grown enough, selfish, or impulsive enough to love Sally the way she deserved. The lives of two people who once lit up America's hearts went away from each other like they never existed. Hal Needham, number 3. The movie began with my illegal cause run. A lot of people laughed at the idea in Smokey and the Bandit of transporting illegal cause beer across state lines, but not many people know that it really happened. And director Hal Needham was the crazy person who did that. He didn't do it because he was a rebel or because he wanted to sneak beer in. He did it because Hal Needham was a fearless man who saw every rule as an opportunity to break it. Coors beer could not be properly shipped outside of the western states in the 1970s. As soon as you crossed the Rocky Mountains with it, you were breaking the law because it hadn't been processed or stored in any way. Hal didn't care, though. He told the story again one time with the same carelessness as when I talked about a lunch I had on the way back from Texas to Georgia. It was against the law, but fun, that my car was full of Coors beer. While he was officially on the run, that fun ride gave him a crazy idea. Could I make a movie out of this? There were no meetings to pitch, no writer's room, and no storyboards. Hal had only a yellow legal pad from a corner shop and memories of the fast roads he'd taken like he was on the run. He wrote it by hand. Police on the chase, bridge jumps, CB radio truckers, semis, and Trans Ams. Right in the middle of it all was an illegal beer run that was both funny and tense. He kept writing as if he was afraid he would forget how the real-life chase went. The handwriting got smeared and creased on the yellow pages. No one thought it would turn into a major movie. Not even Hal himself. After many years, he said, I never thought a silly story about smuggling beer would become the third most popular movie of 1977. A story written on a yellow pad of paper would make over $126 million? I never thought it would. A risky move in real life. A trip that should have been a private memory turned into the spark that started a craze in the culture. That's what was different about Smokey and the Bandit. It wasn't based on how to make money at the box office, it was made from blood, sweat, and the times Hal Needham laughed out loud while almost getting arrested. Hal Needham shows the 18-plus scene that was cut out and hidden by the secret Universal for decades. People remember the romance between Bandit and Carrie as fun and light, just like a PG movie from 1977. Although, the truth is that there was once a much more private scene that was erased before anyone saw it. In an interview many years later, Hal Needham said that he had filmed 2 different takes of the scene where Bandit and Carrie rest under the tree. One version is the one you know, which is nice and funny enough to make people smile. In the other version, there was no nakedness at all, but the breathing was closer. The hands stayed longer. It got a lot more emotional than what the story called for. And most importantly, there was a clear, unmistakable sexual undertone to their conversation that pushed their relationship into new ground. After the big hours, which was something Hollywood didn't do very often back then. A member of the team remembered that Burt Reynolds was a little too excited. Even though Sally Field was there, you could tell Burt was going beyond what was written. The film went on longer. The space between the players shrunk. Everyone could tell they weren't acting just by looking into their eyes. From behind the screen, Hal Needham saw everything. It was too real, too beautiful, and too hot for him. But he also knew that it was taking the movie's tone in a very different direction. When he gave Universal Pictures the rough cut, the studio's reaction was immediate and clear. This scene needs to be taken out. The movie has to stay PG. It wasn't just morals that was at stake. Universal was afraid of losing the family audience that was so important to Southern-style hits at the time. Hal Needham, on the other hand, reluctantly agreed. He agreed that the film's flow would be broken if we kept it. But I have to say, that was the hottest scene we've ever filmed. It gets even stranger from here. The scene wasn't just taken out of the movie theater version. It was totally lost in the company's own records. There are no copies, outtakes, or traces in the remaining nitrate or 35mm prints. It was gone, like it never happened. The only things that remain are the memories of those who were there and the energy that people always felt between Burt and Sally, which turned out to be real. 5. Jackie Gleason. I made up 90% of my lines on the spot. The writing wasn't very useful. Smokey and the Bandit would not be the same without Burt Reynolds. Jackie Gleason was a comedic lightning rod who lit up every scene he was in. What people didn't know was that Buford T. Justice almost didn't exist in the original script. When Jackie Gleason walked into the movie, he seemed so sure of himself that he didn't need lines, practice, or to read ahead. It was enough for him to speak. Hal Needham said that Jackie took a quick look at the script pages when he gave them to her. Then put them back together. There's no need. I'm interested in what Buford has to say on his own. And Jackie Gleason turned into Buford T. Justice in a way that no one saw coming as soon as the camera started rolling. He did not read the role he was in. Every curse word, growl, slam on the car hood, and insult aimed at his lazy son. It was all just play. The crew tried not to laugh as they stood behind the cameras. No one knew what Jackie would say next, who he would make fun of, or how crazy his rant would be. Even Burt Reynolds said he didn't see Jackie coming. Every time he spoke, the whole set fell apart in laughter. The scene in the diner where Buford and Bandit sit across from each other without knowing it was originally just a small line of dialogue that was written down. Jackie Gleason, on the other hand, turned it into a wild back and forth roaring with Southern vibes. And chaotic genius. There were no two the same takes. Not a single line of script was used. After many years, Jackie told something that was so true that it made everyone cold. That's not me reading lines when the camera went off. I was telling the truth as Buford. The angry, bossy, and funny sheriff Buford T. Justice became an important part of American culture. A trait that will last forever. A show that doesn't have a story. This movie shows that sometimes the best moments come from confusion that hasn't been edited. 6th, the famous director says that the players' lives were in danger while the movie was being made. The famous director and stuntman Hal Needham once told the totally honest truth. A lot of what you call famous is just us almost dying. People didn't think too much about Smokey and the Bandit back then when they watched it. The risky drifting. The difficult bridge jumps. They made a thrilling movie that kids watched over and over again, and adults secretly admitted that it made them drive a little faster afterward. What none of us thought about was that the crew had to sweat, bleed, and put real lives at risk to make the scenes that changed the lives of millions of kids. He wasn't making things up either. Howell was a director from a time when they didn't believe in CGI dolls or safety belts that were hidden. He was determined to do it, even if it meant killing someone. Hal Needham wanted a modified car with 700 horsepower to fully accelerate, a real jump across the gap, and the landing to be up to chance when they filmed the famous Broken Bridge Trans Am jump. The way the car would hit the ground was a mystery. No one was sure if the stuntman would make it. The whole front end of the Trans Am fell apart when it hit. It was so loud when metal hit the ground that the whole crew went silent for a few seconds. It was so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat. The stuntman inside was badly shaken and almost passed out. What Hal did, though, was watch the video, nod, and say something that made everyone cold. Beautiful. Beautiful beyond words.
do not throw it away. The Trans Am had to skim past the stands in another part of the script.
In fact, the car lost its grip, spun out, and hit the dugout head-on, shooting wood like shrapnel. The team became scared. People screamed because they thought the stuntman was dead. He looked over the replay, frowned for a moment, and then gave a small smile.
That looks so real. And just like that, a real accident turned into a movie classic. It felt like a roulette wheel when I was on set. No one knew if the next scene would make a story or kill someone.
There is no extra protection, no safety features, and no way to fix mistakes digitally. Do it, and hope that everyone stays living long enough to film the next scene.
That's why Smokey and the Bandit isn't just a thriller.
It's a dangerous experiment that only crazy people with steel nerves would attempt.
7. It was the worst story Burt Reynolds had ever read.
It's hard to believe that Smokey and the Bandit almost never existed after seeing Hal Needham's dangerous acting work. Not because it didn't have enough money or because Universal turned it down, but because Burt Reynolds read the first draft and laughed like it was a weekend joke. At that time, Hal Needham was just a stuntman and had no experience as a director. He walked into Burt's house with a stack of yellow legal pad pages that were smeared and folded with ink and said, "Here's my script.
You should be the lead in it." Burt turned a few pages and then laughed. "How? I've never read a worse story. It was really bad.
The play doesn't have a conclusion, a twist, or a main idea. For no reason at all, run a few racing scenes and southern jokes. And a plot that seemed like it would fit in a cheap drive-in movie theater. People who worked in the field couldn't figure out why Howell was so sure about it."
But Burt laughed at the ridiculousness and then said, "It's terrible, but it's fun."
This was the moment that changed the history of movies.
I also want to have fun.
He didn't think the movie would become so popular. He didn't think it would be a big hit at the theaters. He had no idea that it would become the third most popular movie of 1977, after Star Wars and Close Encounters.
Burt only thought one thing. That would be fun if Hal did it.
Burt smiled when he thought about that moment many years later. "I agreed to play the part because I wanted to have fun, drive fast, and hang out with my friend. I had no idea that that silly little draft would become a landmark that people in America would love for decades. It looked like a spontaneous choice, and it was written on cheap yellow paper. And a famous actor laughing in his living room made one of the most famous movies of all time by chance." 8. Eastbound and Down, the famous song, was written out of fear and a half-serious death threat. As important as Smokey and the Bandit was to 1970s road movies, Eastbound and Down is even more important. A song that, with just a few notes, makes you remember the sound of engines, the dusty miles, and the wonderful feeling of freedom. But behind that strong tune was a story that no one would believe. Jerry Reed wrote the whole song in a panic.
Jerry was playing Snowman, the crook's funny partner.
But Hal Needham had given him another job to do besides playing.
Make the music, especially the main song. The issue was that Jerry Reed had not written anything. The due date was coming up fast, like a Trans Am on the open highway.
Jerry sat alone with his wooden guitar, a can of cold coffee, and a growing knot of worry in his throat the night before the demo recording.
He tried many lines, riffs, and choruses. He didn't have a full melody until almost dawn. It would become one of the most famous songs in American movie history.
The next morning, Jerry came into the studio with dark circles under his eyes and shaking hands from not getting enough sleep.
He played the demo for Hal Needham, who did not say anything while listening. After the last note ended, Jerry took a deep breath and said, "If you don't like it, I'll rewrite it."
Hal looked at him for a moment and then replied with a tone as dry as a gun, "I'll kill you if you change one word."
The room went quiet.
Hal might have been playing with Jerry Reed, but everyone could tell from the look in his eyes that he thought the song was perfect the way it was. After many years, Jerry remembered, "The most famous song I've ever written was written out of fear and a half-serious death threat." And that's the strange magic of Smokey and the Bandit. Things that seemed well thought out were actually made in times of fear and near desperation.
9.
When Hollywood ruined a real historical site for a single scene, it was Lakewood in Greyhound. To most watchers, the opening truck rodeo routine and the chaotic racing scenes in Smokey and the Bandit are simply high-octane entertainment. But very few people know that the filming locations were actually a real piece of Atlanta history.
And the process ended up destroying them.
Hal Needham, with the senses of a seasoned stuntman, always looked for places that were wide, unique, and easy to destroy. When the crew arrived at Lakewood Fairgrounds in Atlanta, he immediately knew he had struck gold. The sun-bleached fields, the cracked dirt track, and the old wooden grandstands all gave off a wild, gritty energy that was almost ghostly in its truth.
Hal didn't think it was an empty venue.
There was a lot of room for carnage and destruction at full speed. The team was all shocked when they saw the Greyhound roller coaster.
It was Atlanta's pride in the 1940s and 1950s.
Old, rusty, and no longer useful, but still standing like a relic from a different time.
Hal Needham looked at it like a child who can't help but break a pretty toy.
He also did something in Smokey and the Bandit 2 that people in Atlanta still feel bad about today.
In front of the camera, he broke down the Greyhound roller coaster. There are no CGI, miniatures, or fake sets.
The real thing was torn down. For a few seconds of amazing action, a cultural landmark of Atlanta, a place where millions of children used to play, and a popular place for generations to go on dates, was broken up into pieces. In a rare interview years later, Hal Needham said, "We burned down a piece of Atlanta's history just to get a big movie moment." He didn't say it as a boast, but with the tone of a man who finally realized he had accidentally removed a piece of the city's memory, all because the film needed that signature Hal Needham level of crazy.
10. The Pontiac Trans Am, when a movie made a car into the American dream.
When people think of Smokey and the Bandit, the black Pontiac Trans Am slicing through the southern sun is the picture that stands out the most.
That car didn't just show up in the movie.
Its gold Firebird logo blazed across the hood, its T-top roof flew open, and its V8 rumble made America's heart race. It turned into a story.
Almost no one thought that the Trans Am wouldn't be a star before the movie.
It only sold 4,600 units a week in 1976, which was a lot less than the Camaro or Mustang. Then there was 1977, just a few weeks after Smokey and the Bandit came out in theaters. Men from all over the country rushed to Pontiac dealerships to get a car that looked like it could beat the cops. They wanted to be Bandit and have the T-top wind in their hair. No ad campaign has ever been able to do what Burt Reynolds did with a smile
and a wheel to move.
Bandit's 1 inch from death drifts was the only sign that ever got people to buy something.
As a result, an unusual sales boom in the history of muscle cars. 1977, more than 110,000 units. 1978, more than 90,000 units. 1909, more than 117,000 units. The best car in the whole Trans Am history.
There was a time when the Trans Am was almost cancelled, but in one night it became a pop culture icon, bigger than its longtime rival, the Chevrolet Camaro.
People bought more than one car.
They bought freedom, they bought revolt, and they bought the dream of hitting the open road and never coming back. A dream that Burt Reynolds sold with just a half smile at the wheel.
Smokey and the Bandit was more than just a chase story. It was a movie. That did something that very few movies have ever done.
It turned a type of car into a symbol, and it made the whole country dream of driving. It's been 47 years, and the black Trans Ams no longer burn up the roads. Both Burt Reynolds and Jerry Reed have died. But when they were making Smokey and the Bandit, they left behind a treasure box full of crazy, scary, funny, and deep human stories. It's time for the cast and crew to tell us the truth.
They are no longer bound by contracts or company image.
A strange joke that almost turned into a fatal bad thing. A terrible plot that made a huge hit at the box office. There's beauty and chaos in this love story. And a story about running out of beer that became an American tale.
The best part? You would never see any of this if you only watched the show. Which detail shocked you the most? Which dark story from behind the scenes of a great movie should we learn next? Don't forget to hit the bell, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next interesting Hollywood deep dig.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next crazy film history hunt.